Wait, don't start. Don't start. Don't start.
Okay.
Uh,
You won't start.
Equalizer, no AP.
So, Shinra, I know you're like a philosophy guy. I know in the past you've been asking me, I think, about topics revolving around
You guys
physicalism,
permit
maybe
me
even the mind.
like literally 2 minutes to get some to get like a snack from downstairs, and then I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're just discussing topics.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm not really
I'll be right back. I'll
interested.
record it. I'll be right back.
I'm not really interested in philosophy of mind right now, unless you have like a view on ethics, like a specific ethical view.
Well, it
Do you
doesn't
have
have to be philosophy of mind. It doesn't have to be philosophy of mind. We could even have a discussion about just overall whether or not the universe has non-physical components, whether that's provable, whether that's problematic.
Yeah, no, like that doesn't seem interested to me. I'm more so focused on ethics right now. Like, do you have a normative ethical view, applied ethical view, meta ethical view that you
Well, I don't
want
really
to?
feel abortion. We've done abortion before. I just did abortion with ICE. Veganism is interesting, but
Wait, what's
I
your
don't know.
stance on veganism?
Yeah, I'm generally pretty sympathetic towards being vegan, towards sparing animals. But I would also say that there's plenty of scenarios in which it's acceptable to eat animals as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything morally wrong. Actually, no, I can defend the view that I saw to eat animals.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that then.
That's
I might promise drop you though.
fine. No, you won't.
Okay. By the way, we'll be taking turns. I'm sure you
Yeah.
would probably prefer that. And
Yeah.
then also, you have a tendency, if I feel like you're rambling, I might interject to just ask you to formalize, but I'll try to keep it at that.
Sure.
So, baby, take me over in the backseat of your Rover. That I know you can't afford. What are my Naruto topics? I shod. I don't debate Naruto. Fuck Naruto. Naruto's a bitch. Worst in the big three. What are we doing? Jesus Christ, IRL, and it seems like Shinra is going to be a soy boy into veganism. He's going to say that it's wrong in all scenarios to eat meat, which is very interesting. Very soy. Very incredibly soy. Exceptionally, this guy is drinking slowly.
Milk is great. I'm telling you.
Maybe that's not vegan, boy. You're in favor of raping cows to get milk? That's very interesting.
Yeah, probably.
That's crazy.
I'd probably just say I'm not that good of a person. I like my milk. So the cows, they're gonna have to farm it.
Can't you get like almond milk or something?
No.
You know, not be a
Nope.
monster.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Discord user almond milk, and also it doesn't taste the same. Gosh, I hate almond milk.
Let me change my input sensitivity. Okay. I'm gonna just put it all the way up. Alright.
Poor Flames wants his tier 3 so bad. You gotta earn that, boy.
Oh god, I swear I beat Jim Bullet.
Okay. I'm changing every single one of my voice settings. Is there a specific voice setting? Not that I'm trying to like interrupt too heavily. Is there a specific voice setting? Because I noticed that whenever somebody talks at the same time that I do, in recordings especially, my microphone just cuts. Like it just cuts off in response.
There should be a voice setting about automatic gain, but that might be. Oh, I might have
Okay, let's figure the topic.
Yeah, it's veganism.
Yeah, we're gonna do something very standard. Shinra's specifically defending that it's always wrong to eat meat.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, give me a second. Whenever you guys are ready, I'll start the recorder.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, let me announce first. And then after this, we can keep it to like below 30 minutes because I won't go to sleep.
This is for WBC too, right?
Yeah, sure. Veganism.
Okay.
Moving to Gara, you know. ping it
Let me
at
make
everyone.
sure that
Everyone. There we go. Let's wait for the crowd.
I did have
if you
automatic
beat him,
muting on.
you get a number.
I'm gonna activate
He's
it.
probably out hitting licks like crazy.
Oh wow! On my recording, I almost had my own. I was gonna take me off.
Oh shit! Wait, can you
Oh,
give me like 1 minute? Just 1 minute? Is that acceptable?
okay. 6 hours
High
later.
level interlocutors. I'm about to throw down right now.
I'm just gonna run the NTT, and it's never failed me.
Name the trip.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Some trait equalization here and there. Gosh, ask yourself, created the undefeatable.
Depending how you phrase it, you might lose automatically.
Nah.
What is it? What is his exact position?
It's ask yourself, a vegan. He just says like, what's the trait tree? What's
I
it called?
know the name, the trait. I'm saying which fork's exact position.
Wait, what conclusion? Was whose position? Mine? I just think it's all Forks. He thinks like it's sometimes like it's eaten. Also, what conclusion are you talking about? That's always bad. Oh yeah, no, I know that it doesn't. I'm just going deontology and things of that nature. Come on now. uh, the reason why I'd say it's always bad is part of my normal. But yeah.
All right, I'm back. You ready?
I hate niggers.
Yeah.
Alright, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Well, yep.
All right.
Timer starts now. Go ahead.
Yeah, to be clear, I think that Shinra's taking upon an exceptionally hard burden. He said that it's always wrong to eat meat. Clearly, the modality of that statement is to say that it's not possible for it to be morally neutral or morally acceptable to eat meat. I think you're going to have to explain and prove that extraordinary argument. So go ahead and get started on that. I'll keep it short and swift.
So to be clear, all doesn't need to be indexed to every single possible. If I say every single or all people in the server think that apples are better than oranges, that doesn't specifically mean something like for all possible worlds, all people within the server think apples are better than oranges. It's specifically
No, I don't mean logically
reference-
possible.
Right.
I'm not trying to
Yeah,
be that
but-
autistic. I just mean
Okay.
like within reason, within practicality. You don't think that it's
Okay.
possible to have like a
Oh.
morally acceptable eating of meat.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
go
just
ahead and get
index it to epistemic possibility. So for all the cases I'm sensitive to, but yeah, the sort of reason I have is I haven't been provided a single distinction that is true for a human, that's not true for animals, which would make it true, like which would make it okay for us to eat human.
So wait, repeat that. You said that you haven't been told a single thing that's true of animals,
least
if true
you
of
can-
humans would make it acceptable.
It's sort of
Are you
like
just going to name the trait?
I'm just
Just
yeah, I'm
name
just
it.
asking you to name the trait, like name the trait that's true for a human.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Can I ask why are descriptive traits going to determine something's moral value? Why does it
I
work
mean,
that way?
typically, whenever you say that, like, what's it called, that human has more value and a rock doesn't, there's some distinction there between those two that makes you assign one more value than the other, unless you're like basing your moral system arbitrarily and you don't have any sort of standards, right? And then in principle, you couldn't deny any act, couldn't say any act.
Well, I'm just wait really quickly. I'm just asking you: do you believe that moral value is generated from descriptive statements?
What do you mean by descriptive statement there?
Like, just like literally, we're describing something, like some sort of aspect, presumably a physical aspect of something, like its species, like whether or not it's conscious, whether or not it's
Yeah, I
intelligent,
think
things of that
typically
nature. Is
that's
that
how
where you
when
think
people.
morality comes from?
Yeah, I
No, I'm
think
asking
typically.
you. Not. I'm asking you specifically. Not what other people think. What do you think?
Oh yeah. Typically, at least whenever I'm based moral consideration, I just base it off of some concordance to a moral standard I have, which would probably be based off of like all the sort of foundation towards that moral. I don't know if it would specifically be a descriptive property, but more so alignment with my preferences. But like I think most of the time, whenever people are trying to claim this thing has a moral value and this thing doesn't, then they're typically trying to point out some property that the thing has. Take for example abortion debates, and they pick out sentience as the thing that they assign
Yeah.
moral value.
I'm just not too interested in that right now because like the reason I'm asking is because it seems very clear that I mean, first of all, I don't know if you recognize the is-ought distinction. If you recognize the is-ought distinction, I think we would hardly assign descriptive statements about things to be where their moral value comes from. And there just seems to be pretty intuitive examples within society where that's not the case when it comes to
What do
other
you mean?
non-society.
Wait,
So,
what
for
do you mean when
example,
you bring up the distinction there?
have you ever heard? You said what?
Yeah, are you just trying to say that descriptive statements can't like give rise to oughts or give rise to
I'm not
normative
saying that
statements?
they can't. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm saying that that's a presupposition of name the trait that I'm asking you to justify. So a good example of why I'm very skeptical of that comes from the great philosopher Arrow. I'm going to be co-opting one of his arguments, which is that, look, in terms of physical description, monopoly money and real life money are hardly dissimilar. They have a lot of the same attributes. They're paper at the end of the day. However, real banknotes are obviously assigned value, whereas monopoly money has no economic
Yeah,
value. Like that's
that's
a pretty
just because
intuitive
of.
example of where the name of the
Mhm.
trait doesn't really apply, but we understand that there's like a difference in value there prescriptively.
Yeah, so specifically, the distinction in value that would be caused by some other descriptive property of the thing. So you could say, oh, well, I'm describing the property of the note, and one of the properties that this thing has is being valued by the common people, right? To a very extremely high extent, whereas the other one doesn't have this property. So take two people, they're identical in every single way, and one of them is your mother, the other one is an identical clone, right, of who
Mhm.
looks exactly like your mother. The reason why you'd value one more than the it wouldn't be to some, maybe it might not be due to some form of like physical property distinction, but due to some emotional relation you have with the thing, which would also still be like a descriptive statement. You could still say like it just has the property of being emotionally connected to you.
Well, we can staleman this argument, and then we could therefore say that similarly we could justify the eating of animals and not humans, because the majority of people seem to have an emotional care and connection and moral consideration for their fellow man or woman, whereas they do not have that same level for farm animals, clearly evidenced by the fact that they eat them,
Hmm.
right? So
Okay.
how would that
Yeah.
not be an analogous argument? And if it is an analogous argument, why wouldn't you accept it?
Yeah. So the sort of reductio to that is very simple. It's just, well, if there was a random stranger across the street and you had no sort of emotional like connection to him, there's a stranger you've never met him. And would you decide to? Do you think it'd be morally okay if I pinned him down, ripped his intestines open, and started eating them just because I have no emotional relation with them? And the answer would trivially be no.
Are you
It's still
speaking?
cannibal.
Are you
Wait,
speaking purely hypothetically? Because I don't think
I
this
mean,
applies
well,
to the real world.
you can look at
I don't
like
think this applies
examples
to the real world
of like
whatsoever.
cannibals who actually exist, who decide to eat people, right? Who come over there. You'd obviously say that the killing and eating of another person is clearly immoral, even if like they feel no emotional connection to them, or even sociopaths who can't feel emotion
No,
like how the
I
rest
don't
of
think
us
that's
do.
equal.
Still say that
I
it's
don't think
immoral.
that's analogous. I don't think that's analogous to
Okay.
what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, what the analogy was is why people have value economically for banknotes like real US dollars, but not for monopoly money. To be clear, it's not just because a few individuals feel that way. It's because we as a collective society emotionally feel that way. We as a
Mm-hmm.
collective society emotionally care about human beings. We emotionally offer them some sort of moral consideration, even if they're totally strangers. And the people that you're talking about, we label them psychopaths, we label them criminals, we call them evil, right? They're outcasted. They don't fit in with
Uh-huh.
the collective consensus. So that's not analogous. You can't say that, oh, well, the reductio is that a few psychopaths out there don't treat people with sympathy and empathy because they're not a part
Okay.
of the collective consciousness that we're taking into
Hmm.
consideration.
So if it's again just some concordance with the majority of people's emotional states, then the sort of response I'd give to that is again take another example where the majority, like most of the earth, has been wiped out. Now there's 30 people who make up a society, and out of all of those 30 people, they all have no emotional connection to you. They view you, they say, oh, they have no emotional connection to you at all, right? They feel completely apathetic towards you. Do you think it would now be morally okay for them to rip you open, crack your skull, and then start eating you? And the answer would trivially be no, right? That even if the
Yeah,
majority
I
of the
also think I
society,
also think that's just analogous. Yeah,
wait,
I
okay,
also think that's just analogous.
what specific part of it is this analogous to?
Yeah, the fact is just that there's not a large enough sample size. So to be clear, when you're saying that there's 30 people, yeah, those 30 people can happen to be completely sociopathic, right? But that's
Wait,
just because we've reduced the Earth's population from millions or billions, or even a country's population from millions to just 30 people.
wait,
That just
mm-hmm.
speaks to a problem in sample size.
Yeah.
That
So
just
my
speaks to,
question
okay,
is,
we unfortunately ended up with 30 people who are complete psychopaths. But
yes,
what I'm
okay,
saying is that, look, in
mhm,
like regular standard affairs, okay, in the real world, look, if we have a society that's collectively agreed that US dollars have value, they're going to be assigned economic value on a macro scale. We're talking macro scale.
mhm.
Similarly, on a macro scale, we assign empathy and moral consideration to our fellow man and woman, our fellow brethren. We do not do the same for farm animals. That's where I'm coming from. That's what I
Yeah,
think you need
okay.
to address.
So one, my question is, look, if the sample size for 30 is too small, right? Then when do you cut off the sample size? Like, would you have a specific number, right? Where you cut off the sample size and say, oh well, once it reaches this amount, then it is considered as a moral standard. So take 100 people, right? Do you think that if 100 people no emotional connection to somebody, and then they decided that, oh well, I want to eat this guy, haha, I feel really hungry right now, I want to eat him. Like, would they be morally justified in eating them? And the answer would again be no, right? I hope you'd also agree that it'd be no.
Yeah.
But then you're
So
trying
to be
say,
clear, I
wait,
think this is a fallacious argument.
wait, so wait,
go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
you're
off.
trying
Go
to say that, like, what's it called, on a macro scale or on the scale of the whole society, then specifically it would be immoral, right?
Yes.
But then, like, you have to give me a specific reason why, like, what's it called, why instead of the fact that we're all just mistaken or we're like assigning our sort of emotional states to all specific things incorrectly or inconsistently, instead of it being
Mhm.
that, instead we're all just assigning it consistently, and this is the real distinction here. I don't know why I would.
So hold on. So wait. It seems like you're asking a really specific question, that being where's the cutoff point. I think that's a bit of a fallacious argument. I don't think that I need to understand exactly precisely where the cutoff point is to say if, oh, this is black and white, 30 people is not enough, right? Like a really intuitive example of this is, I think that incest is wrong, okay? I can hold the position that incest is wrong among brothers, sisters, first cousins, and second cousins. Now you can say, well, what's the cutoff point? Is it the seventh cousin? Is it the eighth or ninth or 10th cousin? Well, I don't really know. I could just tell you, however, that just because there's a gray area that's not mutually exclusive of the fact that there
No.
is a black and white area, and incest amongst brothers and first cousins is wrong.
Yeah.
Similarly, I don't know the exact cutoff from when a population size becomes macro enough for it to fit analogously with what we were talking about, but I can tell you 30 people for sure is not enough.
Yeah, so to be clear, you said specifically, and I think you're hedging a little bit at this point, because you said specifically that if most of society assigns their preferences this way, right, therefore that would be the trade distinction. Then I give you a scenario where most of society aligns their preferences this way. Then you say it's like then you say, oh well, what's it called? It's not it's the sample size is not big enough, right? And then you give me the gray area example. My real question is, okay, well, one, for the sort of incest example, I think upon rational reflection, probably if we thought about it enough, there's probably some huge cutoff point where at least if another person just shares so little genes with you, right, then there'll be no negative there will be no negative repercussions if you guys were to decide to have.
I just don't know what precisely that
Yeah,
is,
well,
and just because I don't know
that would
precisely
wait.
it
To be
is
clear,
doesn't
I just
devalidate my
want to
point.
get this clear. Like, one, that would mean that there is actually a black and white area. You just don't know where it is. But specifically in this sort of context, you're saying that this one isn't enough, right? But this other one, like, and if I say 100 people, you'd also say that isn't enough, right? But 1 million people is enough. But you don't even
Yeah,
know,
a million
like,
people is enough. Yeah, a million people is enough.
yeah, so
Yeah,
then
for
it just
sure.
seems as if you're arbitrarily assigning like quantity, or you're arbitrarily assigning like values to this thing. It's like, why is 1 million people enough for there to be or why is 1 million people enough for them to decide whether or not an action
Because
is right
that's a
or wrong?
macro. Because that's a macro. Because to be clear, that's a macro size society. That's enough for an
What do you
entire
mean?
state. That's enough to have. Yeah, that's enough for an entire state. That's enough to have several major cities. That's enough to have a robust economy. That's enough to have thriving markets of different
Why
varieties.
does
That's
that
enough to
have
have people.
anything to do with
That's enough to
them
have many different. That's enough to have people of many different cultures. So that's to say, the bigger the sample size, I'm sure you would agree. The bigger the sample size that we have, the better we can eliminate outliers. The better we can tell what the actual average is. So I can tell you pretty clearly. Again, 30 people is not enough. And like I
Yeah.
said, I don't think you actually engaged with what I said. Would
Well,
you agree with me? Wait. I just want you to answer this question, and maybe we can just stick to this analogy and see where it goes. Would you agree with me that even if I cannot tell you whether it's the 10th cousin or 15th cousin or 20th, 25th, 50th cousin, even if I can tell you where exactly the cutoff is, I can know for a fact, I can be valid in thinking that it's wrong to have an incestuous relationship with your first cousin?
Yeah,
Do you
okay,
think I
you
can do
can.
that?
Okay, to be clear, you can do that, but you again, the point is that if you say, oh
Would
well,
it be
what's it called?
valid? Wait, would it be valid? Wait,
Wait,
would it be
okay, wait.
valid? Would it be valid?
Yeah,
Would it be
you'd be
valid?
valid in saying that, but the sort of reasons we have would be
I agree.
distinct. So the reason I'd have is specifically just, again, if you reproduce with somebody who is that closely blood related to you, then there's likely evidence that you'll have some form of deformities. If you were to have children, there's also a whole bunch of social repercussions, right? But with these other cousins, you can obviously point out that, again, at a certain point, right, which is clearly established, then we can see that there's this sort of distinction there, right? However, again,
But
look,
not
I can,
clearly
in fact,
established.
I can change the analogy for you, right, just to make it
Wait,
clear.
don't change the analogy. Don't change the analogy. This is
Wait,
the
wait,
one I
wait,
think
wait,
that we're most
wait,
likely
wait. So to
working
be
in.
clear, if you have an issue with the 30 people example, then I could also just say if 1 million people didn't have any sort of emotional connection to, let's say, a group of 30 people, they had no emotional connection. The type of emotional connection they had with them, right, is also the same type that they'd have to like a dog. No, to they'd have to like a cow, right, or a chicken. That those are the same sort of emotional connections they have with them. Would it now be okay for me to factory farm these group of 30 people, cut them open and
Yeah, but
start eating them?
at that point, I think we've departed so far from reality that I don't even know how
Huh?
worth entertaining this hypothetical is. To be clear, I understand that it's a hypothetical, and the point of a hypothetical is to test logic. But one of my problems with these moral debates is that you can give a hypothetical, an absurd hypothetical, for any
Why is it
person's
absurd?
morality that can make it seem
I don't
absurd.
I don't
Because
grant that.
I don't think that this truly really even is reality. I don't think that
Wait,
a million people are typically going to be okay with things like mass rape, mass genocide, mass slaughter, and even in the historical context like Nazi Germany or Israel, where they seem to be okay with it, that's generally because they've been misled about what's truly happening to these
yeah.
marginalized people.
So why
I
do
don't
you
think
think
it's
to be
happening in
fair?
real life.
Okay, well, okay, the thing you pointed out about how, oh yeah, the analogy doesn't happen in real life. It's like, okay, that's cool. But you said the reason why you said, oh well, it being absurd is a bad thing for the sake of the analogy is because that could apply to every single moral system. But my question is why? Why could this apply to views like say deontology or threshold deontology? Why would they apply to those sorts of views? Why would they apply to deontological views? Why would they apply to natural
Well,
law
it
theory?
depends on the principle. It depends on the
Wait,
principle
yeah.
that's being
So wait,
discussed
no.
in
The
the
point is,
analogy.
the
Wait,
wait,
it
the
would
point
depend.
is,
Wait, I'm
to be
answering.
fair,
I'm answering.
I
Wait,
just
I'm
want to
answering.
finish this first. I just want to
Yeah,
finish
you
this.
can clarify. You can clarify.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
the point is just like for you to say that, oh, well, you can't give this analogy because this sort of absurdity, you can point it out for every view. That would only work as a proper critique if you could point out that this not only worked for every view, but also the view I held, right? Because then it'd be like a companions in guilt. So, but you can't even explain why we
Um,
are companions in guilt.
wait. Sure. So really quickly, the reason I'm pointing it out that you can create an absurdity for like pretty much every moral principle, and the reason why that's important is because it gets to the point where, okay, well now that's just trivial. We're just pointing out that at a certain point you could bring any view to some sort of reductio via absurdum, and that doesn't really tell you what view to uphold or what view to believe in because they're all absurd at a certain point.
Yeah,
So
but
to
my
answer your
question is
question,
why are they
wait,
all
to answer your question, I would use the same logic that you gave earlier, right? When I said, well, why do you believe that it's wrong to harm animals? You said, well, because I haven't been presented with a single piece of argument or a single piece of evidence as to why it's okay to harm animals or something along those lines. I would similarly say, well, I haven't been presented a moral principle that you would stand by that could not be hypothetically driven to absurdity in some fucked up crazy world, right? So you could feel free to try it. You could feel free to try to give some, but we could do it with consciousness. We could do it with intelligence. We could do it with valuing things that have the ability to form social constructs or contracts. If you
yeah,
want, we can try it. Just
yeah,
demonstrate.
sure. So I just need to elaborate on the issue misunderstood it. So the reason why I think killing animals is wrong is upon analyzing the sort of traits that people tend to morally value within a human and within an animal, it doesn't seem as if, at least like from analyzing the sort of properties that we value, that that let's say we removed some trait of this human, right, that they would still morally value it the same as an animal. Right. So it doesn't seem as if there's any real sort of like relevant distinction in terms of like
Yeah,
morally valuable properties there.
but what do you
And like
value?
I have
But what
to,
do
so
you
for
value about
example, wait,
animals?
give me a second.
But what
So
do
for
you value
example,
about animals?
what do I
What do
value
you
about
value about
animals?
animals?
Well, I
What do
mean,
you value about
there's a
animals?
bunch of things I value about animals. I think like
Name the
generally
name
life.
the most important
Wait,
one. Name the most important one.
to be clear, I think life is just intrinsically valuable. Like
Okay, so we could
at
like,
least
for
I think
example,
certain.
we
Wait,
could
to be
very
fair,
easily create a hypothetical world
no,
where
chill.
valuing life.
Before
Yeah, go ahead.
I think like
Yeah,
for
what's up?
example, and this is like of course while trying to index the vegan like topic onto like the animals that people typically eat. So I think for almost every or at least for every single animal that people tend to eat on a day-to-day basis, the ones that are in factory farms getting mass eaten, mass slaughtered, I think
How much time do we
their
have left?
lives just are intrinsically valuable. They
Wait,
have
how much time do we
sentience.
have left? I wanna move on if we have because there's one more point I wanted
Um
to get to.
17
Um,
17 minutes in, so
we're only 17 minutes and you have a max of 45.
Okay. Sure, you did say you want to leave before 30. Do you want to go for the full 45 if we have to?
yeah, we can go for the full 45.
Okay. My fault. So to be clear, like I understand all of that, but what I was trying to say to you is this, right? Like the problem I have with name of the trade arguments, um, on top of the fact that they presuppose that moral value is going to come from descriptive traits, which of course I'm granting for Steelman the argument. But my problem is that they often like just say, well, imagine this hypothetical fucked up world and your view is reduced to absurdity. Now you shouldn't be eating meat anymore. It's like, well, that's cool, but A, like I said, any view could be taken to absurdity, and then B, we're so
Wait,
far
why
removed
would
from reality
threshold the
that
ontology?
I have no reason to believe that this should influence my view. So like the thing
Yeah.
you just said, you said that
Mhm.
life is inherently valuable. Well, if life's inherently valuable, I mean, would you take 1,000 lives if it meant that you could prevent the detonation of nuclear warheads in every major city?
Yeah, I think taking 1,000 lives in every scenario is wrong. So
Really, you think it's wrong? So you understand that
yeah,
the thing that happens if you don't do that is that millions of people will die, and those
yeah,
regions will
it's
become
like
uninhabitable.
I'll explain it to you like this. It's say, for example, you have an option, kill a mother and a child, or kill the mother on its own. It's like, well, okay, obviously both of these options are wrong, right? But
But it's
doing
not evil.
doing the second option is obviously like it's less wrong than the first one, but it's still wrong, right? So in this
No,
sort of
I
scenario,
don't
if
think
you tell
so.
me, what'd you say?
No, I don't think so. So to be clear, would you agree
Oh,
that wrongness is? Do you agree that wrongness and evilness is defined by the lack of good? That it's parasitic in that nature?
um, I take wrongness and even wrongness to be clear to just be a measure of how much like of things in which we value how much they are harm. So an action is more wrong if more things we value are harm. An action is less wrong if like less things we value are harm.
Yeah. So like here's, and I'll put it in I guess common term usage or whatever. Like we live our lives, and pretty much every action that we have is not going to be perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The food that we buy is going to be coming from unethical sources. The electronics we buy from unethical sources. Oftentimes we have to choose between the quote unquote lesser of two evils. So that's just to say that when I determine something to be good, right? When I'm determining what is a good action to do here, a good action is to say, well, I mean, what engages in wrong or harmful behavior at the least, and then we select that.
Okay.
So to be clear, I think that when you say that it's wrong or it's evil to kill 1,000 people to save millions, no, I don't think so. I think that's a pretty basic utilitarian calculation. I think that even
Yeah.
people who
Okay.
don't prescribe
Mm-hmm.
to utilitarianism, people who have principles, right, would still say that's the right thing to do in like an applied ethics sense. So
Yeah.
I mean, I
Okay.
don't know. I
So
don't see it as wrong. Why is it wrong?
well, to be clear, at least maybe you can say under utilitarian that maybe that sort of argument would be convincing. But again, I'm not convinced of utilitarianism. I haven't been given a like concise and succinct argument for the view of utilitarianism. So I don't know why I'd even grant down that
I can
first
give you
point.
one. I can give you one
The
if you
second
want.
thing is like, look, wait, to be clear, the second thing is like, look, okay, every single person's actions, they aren't perfect, right? But obviously, we'd say something like, if there was a scenario which you have to sacrifice your life to save two people, like obviously you getting like anyone getting killed, like most people say anyone getting killed in any scenario or in this scenario is wrong, right? Anyone dying is wrong, right? But obviously, you sacrificing your life and one person dying, whereas two other people dying, right? You dying on your own would be you'd be committing less evil, right, or less wrong would be happening in the world. But that is not
Yeah, if you
identical
take,
to
wait, are
any
you
sort of
saying if you
way.
take your life to save others? Are you saying if
Yeah,
you take
if
your
you
life to
take your
save
life
others?
to save others,
Yeah,
right? Nobody would say,
that's seen as heroic,
yeah,
rightfully so.
that's
Seen
seen
as
as
heroic.
wait, to be clear, that's
It's
seen as
selfless.
heroic. Okay. So
It
to be
is
clear, the
heroic. It's
reason okay, yeah,
selfless.
the reason why, and I want to get this clear first, the reason why that they're saying it's heroic isn't because you died, but it's because you're saving two people, and it also demonstrates the extent you're willing to go
Yeah,
to save others.
that's my point. That's
But
my
nobody
point,
would
though.
wait. Wait, to be clear,
That's
but
the
nobody would
wraparound
say.
point. Wait,
But wait.
that's my
I just
point,
want to
Shinra.
finish. I just want to finish the thought. But nobody would say
Wait,
that
go
if there are
for
two
it.
possible worlds where you save these two people, you don't die, and you save these two people, and you do die while saving. Obviously, we'd pick the world where you don't die, right? So clearly, there's a
Yeah,
disparity in terms
but
of how good
unfortunately,
they
that's
are.
not the real world. But unfortunately, that's not the real world. And almost every time, we're not able to take moral decisions in a vacuum for that very reason.
I
So
don't
to
know
be
what you
clear,
mean by keeping
that
in a
was
vacuum.
wait. To be clear, what I'm trying to keep interruptions to a minimum. I know,
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
why that's why I stopped earlier. Yeah, it's like Oh, by the way, just to answer, I guess, really quickly, when I say we can't take it in a vacuum, I just mean that there's context, there's real world context that makes our decisions far more nuanced. Because, like we said, look, if it were possible that we could save somebody without giving up our own life, that'd be preferable, sure, in an ideal world, but that's not always the case. And it is heroic, it is selfless, because we have the courage to say, despite that, despite the fact that that's not what we want, we put the greater good ahead of ourselves, right? And realistically, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to the greater good. When I
Yeah.
went to the example earlier about how, through a utilitarian perspective, it's good, it's heroic even perhaps, to sacrifice 1,000 people to make that hard decision for the sake of saving millions. It's not that I'm saying that it's good that those 1,000 people died. It's that something new was brought into the equation, something more than the loss of life, that being the saving of millions of lives, which greatly outweighed that for the greater good. That is a heroic good deed. And you asked earlier, could I provide like some sort of compelling argument for utilitarianism? Well, maybe there's other moral frameworks out there. I'm sure you might know of a few, maybe if you could bring them up, that would allow you to do this. But if you're stuck in a principle-based moral framework like deontology, where you just have to say, oh, on principle it's wrong, so I cannot do it, well, then you're stuck in inaction, right? You're going to allow those millions of people to die for the sake of thousands because you can't bring yourself to act when it's most crucial because your principles are telling you, right, that they're rejecting
Yeah.
that. That's very that I think is a
Um.
true reductio absurdum, if
mhm.
there ever was one.
Yeah.
So you can
So
respond to that.
yeah. So to respond to the first bit, like, okay, look, I can grant that not every single moral scenario is going to be in a vacuum specifically. Maybe I can grant that. However, specifically, obviously, just because it isn't in a vacuum doesn't suddenly mean that we would say that like these actions are not good or bad anymore, right? So a case of you letting 1,000 people die to save a
Yep.
million, even if that's the best option we could have picked, nobody would sit there with their head held high and say that that was a good action to have done. Letting these 1,000 people die is never a good action, right? But specifically, the good action that would be saving these people. So if you ask me, for example, would you like, is killing an animal morally okay to save a million people? It's like, okay, well, obviously killing an animal is wrong, but saving a million people is right. So, and then when you tell me that there's this sort of reductio here, and the reductio specifically is you would be unable to act because it goes against your principles. The ontology is a view which puts the right before the good. I don't know if you know the distinction there, but I'll explain it simply. So the right would just be what allows us, at least this is how I understand it. The right is just what preserves the most amount of what we value. However, the good would just be what is in concordance with a certain principle you have. So, in terms of practicality, you could act in a sort of way which maximizes or which allows us to preserve more of what we value. However, we wouldn't say that as a moral action,
Completely
which
fucking
also,
wrong, by the way.
wait, okay, but
No, no, no.
which also seems to capture the way we actually use moral language in the first place, right? Again, whenever we use moral language, it doesn't seem as if we're saying that letting these thousands of people die is a good thing, right? So when you tell me that like we'll be doing the lesser of two evils and that's what you consider good, I don't even know if most people would consider it that way. But again, I'm not convinced of utilitarianism at all. I think that the ontology more like accurately captures the way we use moral language. But I'm going to figure out where I got the thing from. Give me a second.
Whether you agree with it or not, I mean, you made a few just like objectively incorrect statements there. There are plenty of times where we say that it's a good thing or that it's heroic or just thing for people to lose their lives in pursuit of something greater. We do it with the military all the time. That's why we award people medals of honor. It's why we have entire holidays and months in celebration for the sacrifices that our troops made in service of granting us our freedoms. And this is not just an American culture thing as well. It happens in Ukraine. Most of the Ukrainian citizenship is in support of the Ukrainian military action to keep Russia from invading their country and restricting their freedoms. This is true, again, whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with Hamas or not, right? Or agree with Palestinian freedom fighters or not. This is true of the Palestinians. It's true of Hamas, that they have great support and they have great honor for the people who have lost their lives. Because again, they're fighting for something greater than themselves. They're fighting for their freedoms. They're fighting for their rights to exist as they want to have self-determination. So I mean, like, this is it's just a matter of fact. This isn't even like a matter of like debate or opinion or disagreement. When you say that you don't know if most people would reward honor or moral goodness to the loss of life, it truly just does depend on what it's in pursuit of, which wraps back around to, look, at the end of the day, if millions of people are going to die if not for 1,000 people dying. Look, nobody's going to be happy about those 1,000 people dying. Like, it's not to say that we won't be sad about it, that we won't mourn for those people, that we won't be depressed about it, that it won't be hard for their families. But that is to say that in an objective analysis of a nuanced situation where a choice has to be made, it's very clear what the good choice is. And the good choice is to save those millions of people and prevent global destabilization. That is the
Yeah.
good choice to make. And if to be clear, and this is a further argument for why it's a good choice to make, I would argue that it's an evil choice to not make that decision. It's an evil choice to allow those millions of people to die because you weren't capable of sacrificing 1,000. To be clear, I don't think that makes you an evil person, right? I want to clarify, because I think it's very understandable why you wouldn't want to kill 1,000 people, but it's certainly an evil decision. It's an evil action to allow millions to die for that reason. And if that's an evil action, then the counterpart must be a good action. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add, and then I hope we can move on to like a different point, just because I don't want to go in circles for too long. The only reason I keep on stressing how you could drive anything into absurdity if you really, really stretch out the hypothetical, or we can't just have morality in a vacuum. It's always within context, because that's just true, right? That's just the reality of the situation. We're talking about the types of moral decisions that we're making in a Earth that we inhabit, not a vacuum world where we can make the best possible, most ideal decisions. That doesn't really exist. This is the reality we have to operate in. We just have to accept it. That's just the harsh truth. So I think that's just where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a whole bunch of things, and maybe I forgot. I'll try and respond to everything I remember. So there's a whole bunch of things. First, the Hamas thing, all of the like real life examples. All I'd say there is that yes, the thing that they are praising them for, the thing that they are like just in support of specifically would just be that they are fighting for their freedom, that they're fighting for people's rights. What they aren't in support of, and that's okay. So specifically, the fighting for people's rights thing, the saving people's lives, that is the part that they consider good. The part that they consider bad would obviously be these people dying, right? So even if their deaths then for some odd reason decided to make the best results, right? Again, it doesn't seem as if suddenly because it makes the best results, we'd consider the action of them dying bad overall, the action of them dying good overall. So in this same sort of context, if we're trying to link it back to veganism, if we say that, oh yeah, well, this animal dying would create the best results overall, I can grant that in the sense that it preserves more of what we value. However, I don't think that that specifically would make it good to do or make it a moral action, right? I think that sure, maybe I can say that if there's an option of don't do anything which lets 2 billion people die, do something which only lets only 1,000 die, or do the other thing which lets 1 million die. Letting 2 billion people die, letting 1,000 people die, and letting 1 million people die. All of this can be wrong, right? However, clearly there's there's a least wrong option of them, right? So again, trying to tell me, I keep saying the word right, but trying to tell me specifically that all of the instances in the real world, you can like boil them down into these nuanced scenarios. It just seems to ignore the fact that people seem to have moral principles. I don't think many people would say that, oh yeah, if these people who are fighting for our freedom, they suddenly decided to commit sexual violence against the other people they were fighting against, to strike fear into their heart, to cause them to run away and stop the wars that they were fighting. Obviously, we'd say that the act of sexual violence in that context as well, even though it still does provide the best sort of consequences, is still wrong. So to say that suddenly we don't have moral principles and we base our morality only off of what provides the best consequences, which is specifically what most utilitarians would argue for, just doesn't seem to be true and doesn't seem to be factual. Again,
I think
that's
you
all.
misrepresented
Really.
something, if I
Yeah.
may. Because I want to give you the chance to respond to it. I want to be fair, because I think you did misunderstand what I was going for. I wasn't making the argument that it's a good thing that there's a loss of life. I was simply making the argument that if you put life ahead of everything else, if you say that life is inherently valuable, and that's what we have to center around as if it were a religion, then there are going to be circumstances that are intuitively absurd. I think that these are reductio ad absurdums, and where now we can't make the decision to send out troops for war, to defend a country, to defend its self-determination, to defend its people and citizens from becoming slaves to another nation, to defend their ability to protect their freedoms and self-determination. Suddenly that's not available because all of that is superseded by this crazy, I would call it a crazy at this point, fixation on preserving life, even though,
Yeah.
right, that ignores the fact that life at the end of the day can often be wielded as like a tool, right, a mechanism for preserving things that in some instances we would consider even more valuable. people, which is why I made the point of there's honorary months and holidays for these types of people who make these sacrifices. The
Yeah.
entire point of those holidays and honorary ceremonies is that there are things that are more valuable at the end of the day than life. So
Yeah.
I just want to give you the opportunity to
Yeah.
respond to
So
that.
the sort of response I'd give to that as well is like, look, if you're trying to say that the practicality because it doesn't weigh into or it doesn't consider the fact that maybe some decisions preserve more of what we value than others. Again, that's where the right good distinction comes from. Like you can read about this in like multiple pieces of literature. I'm pretty sure Schiffer Landau covers it in one of his books about it. But it's just the point of is one of them creates the best results. So the right action would be the one which creates the best results. So in terms of practicality, consistently what we should be guiding our actions around is which one creates the best results. And then, but that has nothing to do with the good action. So take again, if you want to be a hard utilitarian under this, and take again an instance of where there's 1,000 people and 1,001 people, and you kill 1,000 people to save the 1,001. Do you think suddenly people would say, "Oh yeah, well we would stop praising you because oh yeah, you did something that's morally grave, da 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 da. You saved these people." It's like, well, no, we'd say that the action of killing people in this context is wrong, even though it does create the best result. So to suddenly say and act as if that just because it has the best results overall, that is identical to what most people mean whenever they say things are moral or immoral, just doesn't seem to map onto people's intuitions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to conclude, I guess, because I guess I also wanted to provide like a more clear response to that specific point. I'm rejecting the idea that this right, what is it called? The right good distinction? What are you calling
Yeah,
it?
the right like comes before the good, basically.
Yeah, the right comes before the good. To be clear, I'm saying that in a world as nuanced as ours, where we very rarely, if ever, have the opportunity to do the best possible thing, the most ideal thing, I think this is like a meaningless distinction to make. Because if we cannot ever have the best possible world, why is it even worth like worrying about or like attempting to seek out? That means that good is going to be synonymous with the best practical thing that we could do at any given point in time. That's what I believe. So I don't know,
I
that would
mean,
just be
well,
my response to
yeah,
that. I
I
kind
guess
of wanna, I don't want to get stuck on this point. There's something else I wanted to go over. So
yeah,
I was
we
hoping we
can
could
go
move
over
on.
in a second, but the sort of final statement I'd make about this is like, okay, well, even if we're in a world which we do not or we rarely have the capabilities of being able to do the best possible option or the one which preserves all things in which we value, which I don't even know if I grant, but that's just empirics. But again, I think that just because we live in that sort of world does not mean that we should abandon all of our principles. So again, even if we live in a world where suddenly they all decide that haha, murdering innocent children is okay, right, because it creates the best results, I think most people would have principles which go against that. Most people would say that no, you shouldn't go about beating my child to death just because it provides water for the society for the next 10 years. Like nobody would grant that. So again,
Mhm.
maybe it's just an intuition disconnect, but it's fine. We can talk about the
Yeah,
next
that's
nuance and
yeah,
move to that.
that's just gonna be yeah, I did it. That's just gonna be like an emotional appeal from that person. Of course, that's their child. It's not gonna be like the coherent moral argument. But I do digress. The other thing I wanted to talk about, however, is I mean, look, I think that there's like plenty of meat that we can eat with an ethical conscience. I find it very strange that you say that life is the be all end all. Shellfish, for example, very basic, very simple organisms, not complex whatsoever. When it comes to conscious experience that they display, it seems to be at an absolute zero. Some of them don't even seem to have brains. I mean, if you want to say that they're living in the sense that they're organic life forms, I suppose so. But we're at the point where we're just slurping up something that doesn't have a will, doesn't really feel pain, doesn't have desires,
Yeah,
is living purely off of survival instinct from its biological functions and nothing else. I feel no moral like conundrum eating
yeah.
like an oyster,
So
for
I just want
example.
to specify because I'm not too clear on the empirics of every. What I said at the beginning, maybe you missed it, was I'm indexing like or eating meat generally to be for all animals which we see consistently, the ones we're putting in factory farm, those ones which we I think generally eating them in most or if not all situations, I should say, is morally wrong. But the case of shellfish, it doesn't like the reasoning you give doesn't really seem to be that appealing. Like obviously, like dead people have display less sentience than these shellfish. Yet we don't go around eating dead people. So to say that the reason why it would be okay for us to eat these shellfish is because they do not display complex mental states would just be absurd.
or really any mental states. But one thing that I wanted to point out, I mean, the first thing that you said, that's going to be relative to the culture that you're talking about. So shellfish are extraordinarily popular within, I know, Asian cuisine. Asian cuisine, of course, is going to be very popular in Asia, which I should remind you is the most populated area of the world ever. And of course, Asian cuisine is not just popular in Asia. There's plenty of Asian restaurants in the Western world, like America, for example. So I'm going to take it to be popular enough to be warranting discussion when we're talking about if it's bad to eat all meat, which I think the answer is no. The other thing as well, I mean, the reason why we don't eat human bodies, I mean, that's just going to go back to the emotional connections that we talked about early in the conversation, where, look, it causes a great amount of emotional distress for us as like a general population, at least within the Western culture, for people to just be eating dead bodies, right? Maybe in a different culture where that's not really causing distress, that's whatever, I don't really care about it. But at least in the Western culture where it does cause mass distress to people that I do care about, I would advocate against that absolutely. But I
Okay.
don't think that takes away from the point that I don't think that takes away from the point that look, nobody's massively distressed, or there's not like a mass distress, I wouldn't say, about eating shellfish. And these things
Okay.
like show like literal no cognition, like literally no
I mean, well,
cognition.
I guess this goes into a point that I wanted to talk about. Why instead, I don't think that basing people's what is moral or immoral, people's general mental states or emotional states would be a good moral foundation. I think sometimes people can just be applying their preferences or their emotional like states inconsistently. So take instances of black and white people, right? In the past, they used to think that well, black people were inferior, all of that stuff, all of that like really stupid racist stuff, right? Like obviously they used to have those sorts of mental states, and the reason why was based off of a distinction that didn't even exist, or like there was no real relevant distinction there. Yet they were still applying their preferences in a way which was like, yeah, they preferred this to, or they didn't have preferences against this happening to black people, but they did if it happened to a white person, right? So again, the point is just to say that just because we have preferences or emotional states towards this specific action, but not to this other action, seems as if that you'd be trying to say that most people are rationally reflecting upon the consistency of their preferences, which again, I think not only is that an empirical claim, but I think it's also just straightforward.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I don't think it's silly to care about people's mental well-beings and mental distress levels. I certainly don't want people killing themselves. I certainly don't want people to be excessively depressed to the point that they're not productive whatsoever and they're being a horrible drain to their friends and family and community. That's things that I want to avoid. Now, I would grant that there are some instances in which we can not care about people's emotional distress levels, where we can say that something else supersedes that, or that they're being entirely irrational. Like I would say for the example for black people, obviously we're not going to prioritize the mental well-being of white people when the product of that mental well-being is that they are enslaving and discriminating against and segregating black people who we know to be sentient people who have feelings, who have relationships, who have families, who deserve to be treated equally. Obviously that's going to override white people's distress levels. However, if we're going to make that argument, I would similarly ask you, then what's the argument as to why we should not be eating shellfish? Because like I said, I think it's reasonable that people would be emotionally distressed by you eating their dead fucking relatives. But when it comes to shellfish, they're not, we're not, there's not really a mass emotional distress level. And if there was a mass emotional distress level, I mean, over what? They don't have brain cognition. They don't seem to have like a nervous system that grants them the
Yeah,
ability to feel pain. What are we getting distressed over?
yeah. So first of all, the point I brought, or the reason why I brought up the black people and white people stuff, is specifically to say that people seem to apply their preferences inconsistently. So again, I don't know if you know, I'm pretty sure the term is cognitive dissonance, but it's basically just like you
Yeah,
can
it is.
observe two case. Okay, yeah. So you can observe two cases which have identical, like sort of morally relevant properties, yet you still decide maybe arbitrarily, or you decide to assign one of them or give one of them your emotional like have emotional connections to one of them, but not have emotional connections to the other one. So then I don't understand, why is it not the case that most of these people who don't have severe emotional reactions whenever they see these living creatures die, right? Why isn't it just another case of cognitive dissonance? We can
Yeah,
just have
because I could, I mean, we could, I
evolutionary.
mean,
Wait, I
you
mean,
might have
to
like
be
more of
clear,
a, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to specify this. We can may just have some that causes us to have a like greater emotional reactions to our own species dying, or like harm happening to our own species. But again, it's sort of like obviously basing your moral system off, yeah, well, if there isn't part of my species, it doesn't matter, would be absurd, and I think you would agree with that,
Uh-huh.
right? So those
Well,
could
I mean,
explain the
here's
sort of intuitions we have. rather than it being what's it called? Rather than it being just some random like disconnect in terms of what we value.
Yeah, I mean, cognitive dissonance is a real thing, but I don't think that's like a psychological term that you could throw around all willy-nilly. I mean, there's a reason why when it comes to diagnosing people with psychological disorders and making psychological evaluations, pretty much every therapist and psychologist will tell you that it's case by case, that you can't just generalize and say that, oh, this person has cognitive dissonance, that you have to investigate on a case by case level to
Is
see if they
cognitive
actually have
dissonance like
cognitive
a
dissonance.
medical?
So,
Is it like a mental thing?
not
I
like a
thought
medical condition. It's not like a
yeah.
medical condition, but it's a part of a psychological evaluation. It's part of a psychological profile. So that's why I would say, okay, well, we have to determine that there is cognitive dissonance, and my confusion is where's the cognitive dissonance, and I'll explain why I'm confused about that. It doesn't seem like it's unreasonable for people to be upset that you would dig up and eat the corpses of people that they loved and cherished throughout the entirety of their life. It doesn't seem unreasonable they would be emotionally distressed at witnessing something so brutal, so barbaric and graphic, happening to somebody that they shared memories and experiences with. However, I mean, where's the cognitive dissonance in not caring about, eating shellfish who don't seem to have a nervous system that allows for them to have pain, don't seem to have a conscious experience. I don't even think like many of them even have a brain, if anything. I mean, where exactly is the cognitive dissonance? Can you
Yeah.
demonstrate it? What are you talking
Okay.
about?
Yeah. So I just searched it up. Cognitive dissonance is supposedly a mental like state, and it's just whenever a reaction
Yep.
people have whenever they realize their like mental states are or their
Yep.
standards are inconsistent or something. But look, the point
Yep.
is
That's what
just
I said.
I don't think the main reason why people are angry that you're digging up other people and eating them or eating their corpses is wrong. I don't think it's because of the fact that they have an connection. So take for example, King William the Great in ancient Egypt, right? Like imagine that random
Okay.
guy. Nobody's ever heard of him. He proclaimed himself as king in the desert, then died of starvation. I then you see me dig up his grave and start eating his corpse, right? Like it's like obviously that's wrong. I don't know who that guy is. I have no emotional connection with them. But immediately Protonto, I can just tell that the action of eating people or eating people's remains is just wrong, right? So it can't be
No, I
emotional
do think there's a
connection because
reason.
you'd
I
still
do think
say,
there's a reason. I do think
okay,
there's a reason. I do
okay,
think
what would
there's a
be the
connection.
reason then?
Look, yeah, to be clear, I mean, I have no personal connection to the children who were shot and killed in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, but I feel for them and I'm greatly sad about their deaths because they were people, they were human beings at the end of the day. And even if I didn't personally know them, I knew other people. And it's like, well, if I care about and love these other human beings, I know that these other human beings that died, they had lives, they had families who cared and loved them. They had their own hopes and dreams and emotions. And that's something that I greatly empathize with. I don't think it's for no reason. So even if you were to dig up somebody that I don't personally know and you begin eating them, I'd be like, that's extremely distasteful. That's extremely wrong. That's a human being who deserves respect, even post mortem. But again, how at all does this apply to shellfish? Like,
Yeah,
why are we morally defending? Why are we morally? I would even go so far to say, why are we morally grandstanding about something that doesn't feel pain and doesn't think? It's like a
yeah.
rock it's like a fleshy rock. We're eating a fleshy rock. Where's like the
So
moral after that?
I mean, well, I'm unclear as to whether or not pen, but I don't really
And
think that matters.
time. That's it, guys. That's what we got. That's what we got
Oh
for
wow,
today.
really?
Okay.
Oh wow.
Yep. It's exactly 45 minutes. I'm gonna upload it.
Wait, does the last thing he said go through because like hit time limit?
Kinda ish, but I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna
What?
listen to it with somebody. I mean, it's kind of the point. Keep track, but
Dude, we were just at
I'm not.
17 minutes.
I'm not gonna like hoe you off of that. I don't think.
Yeah, no, he
I'll believe
just
you.
made that.
He hit you with a point at the end. I know, but I'll let you know. I'm gonna rewatch it with Juju. I kind of have an idea. That was a really good debate. That was actually extremely good faith in Linear, like unironically on some level. So I'm gonna listen to it later. I'll be back.
Well, I mean, like it was a good
Oh,
debate in my opinion. There was a couple instances where Forks was trying to gaslight Shinra into thinking that cognitive dissonance was like some kind of severe medical condition that people have. And
yeah,
like,
no.
Not at all. I just said it was a psychological profile that's worthy of being studied case by case. That's all I was saying.
well, I mean, I think it's kind of like simple to determine the psychological profile. If somebody has like obviously contradicting views, I don't think it's like that hard to identify it, especially if they just say it,
Well,
Yeah,
I think
like,
you would still have to talk. I think you'd still have to talk to them, but
I guess.
or maybe they have
But
like
I mean, yeah.
I mean, like not every time, not like each and every time, but I think in general it's a good rule that when we're talking about like somebody's psychological or mental states, it's probably not like a fair or good thing to generalize when you could just talk to them and see what they're actually thinking.
Maybe, maybe like I guess in like certain situations, yeah, you probably need that. Yeah.
Anyways, time to upload this recording, then go to sleep.
Okay.
Hold the phone. Wait a second.
Pick up the phone, baby. Ooh.
Wait a second. Something
I thought
really
the
could
oh,
have
good.
happened now. Like something really infuriating. Like maybe my recording might have not picked up any of the audio that. What the
We
fuck?
had his bike volume down.
No,
Let's make
like,
sure we save
So make sure you
Convo
get
audio.
yeah, and also Jester, you have the recording, right?
yeah, he does. But